if you're someone who is going through a bit of a rut in their training, you're plateauing, you're maybe not enjoying things, and you feel like you're just kind of going through the motions with your practice at the moment, I can understand that. I totally do. I've gone through it myself. And I just want to point to a few warning signs that might make you aware of this. We have to make these things aware to ourselves in order to understand when change is necessary. But what I want to point to in a way is these warning signs as a potential stimulus or opportunity for you to seek out answers, to seek out things to incorporate into your practice, to seek out potential change and development in something that's obviously important to you. Training, physical activity and movement practice is probably something that's important to you. That's why you're listening to this. So with these warning signs, I'm hoping that you will have some tools, some ideas, some potential shifts in perspective that are going to help you reignite a process of change in an area of life, of your practice that's important to you. So have a listen. Hello folks, how's it going? You're very welcome back to another episode of the Meditations on Movement podcast. This is our special behind the scenes series of building a movement community. So to give a brief overview, if you have yet to tune into these episodes, this is going to be all about the processes, everything that's going on behind the scenes with my current goal at the moment, which is building a community of like-minded people on the path towards moving more freely, both in body and mind in a way. If I could kind of encapsulate it into a short little elevator pitch, that would really be it. But obviously there's lots of nuances to that, so that's what I guess I'm hoping the behind the scenes look at things will help people see. It'll help me get a little bit more comfortable communicating the message and refine, because I think that's what I'm starting to notice is there's kind of different strategies, multiple ways of going about getting your message across on social media, and I guess it's not becoming an influencer. Don't want that. It's a horrible life is the way it seems, but I guess being able to attract the right people, build a community, those are really the things that I see social media being able to help me with, both operating online and in person, not necessarily excluding people just because of geography. Like I'm located in Bray at the moment. That's where the in-person school operates. So having people from all over the world would be amazing. So having like remote online access as well is going to be a key part of things. But how the process will work over time, like one way to think of it, to kind of go into detail about that stuff, like say for example today it's Tuesday the 18th, we're 12:20, Bodhi is down, all that sort of stuff. I've managed to get a lot of work done this morning. The main focus on a Tuesday for me is one-to-one work. So I have students of mine that work with me in a very intimate capacity. So they work with me on a one-to-one basis where I am kind of laying out a more definitive map and process of how things are going to operate. If you're very used to more like strength and conditioning focus, you're probably aware of like the idea of laying things out in sort of a block, like understanding that there's certain elements that you want to work on. There's various different approaches to periodization and how things might work, but you can understand it's more of a long-term focus. And then I use that as kind of like a roadmap, a focus for things going forward in terms of, say, like the physical practice. But then what I'm also doing with my one-to-one students is giving them the space to learn themselves, learn about their own body. There's this concept of, say, like minimum effective dose, but if anything, I'm kind of giving like minimum effective instruction a lot of the time, where you need to learn about things yourself. You need to go through the process of playing around with certain things, and of course I'm pointing in the right direction and I'm giving you the tools to go and sort out those things. But some things may be very definite in terms of, say, the prescription for various things, but then there is a bit of a back and forth in terms of figuring out the movements themselves. And certainly within an online capacity, I'm not necessarily there in with them physically, but I'm certainly sending them on videos demonstrations, notes of things to kind of work on. One of my students kind of summarized it really well, this kind of like asynchronous feedback, the idea of like things aren't necessarily urgent in a way. Like, as I said, we do things where I do a bit of a kind of weekly check-in on a Tuesday. So that way there's like a definitive day where there's like, cool, bit of feedback, bit of a summary of the week. And then it's a process of iteration from there where we can kind of work on things in more of a system focus. Getting into a good routine of things, understanding what's working well, what's maybe not working well, but then still kind of referring back to that general roadmap and understanding the phases of development, the things that we need to work on going forward. And I guess I point to that because I'm always very interested here in kind of the experience that people have with training, with physical activity, all that sort of stuff, and I'm always I'm maybe unaware to the fact that, you know, people haven't gone through things in such a, you know, in the way that I haven't. You know, they've been exposed to things that maybe weren't the best fit, or didn't really go through a process of education, and maybe even gave them some kind of false ideas, some beliefs and systems that are a little bit outdated, or maybe didn't have the best intention for them in their development. They were very kind of one-dimensional. They focused on one thing and maybe even created some bad habits around nutrition and training that they weren't even aware of. So I guess I've been very lucky in terms of the way in which I approach things. I always approach things with this idea of, no, I want to understand why things are working the way they're working, and how do I see, how do I understand this process, so that, not that I can take care of it myself, but more like, how do I understand the phases, comprehend it, understand what I'm doing, so that I can become kind of more invested, you know, further on. And like, once you comprehend and understand something, you're much more willing to engage in the process, and you're going to see it filter out into the rest of your life as well. So so when I have conversations with people and they're maybe not aware of this process happening over time, and they're seeing it as very much like, no, this is the way of training. Like, that's how, I guess it's my criticism in a way of a lot of the systems of training that you hear, and it is a bit of a bit of a marketing ploy to a degree. You know, the idea, if you can point blame at a certain methodology, a certain system, when you point the finger and point blame, it kind of creates a bit of controversy, in the sense that it's like, oh wow, they're saying that this is completely bad, and I'm doing it right now to a degree. But I guess what it is important to point out is, you're not necessarily pointing and saying that this person is bad, this person is doing things wrong. You might point to a system and say some of the principles maybe aren't being of strength conditioning, of sports science. Maybe you're pointing to some of the principles and you're saying that they're misaligned, they're not necessarily working, or there are other more beneficial ways of going about it. One of the things that get that you know, in this kind of short, low attention span kind of world, this fast-paced environment that we have, is those kind of things stand out. And when you can make them more succinct and more concise and more straight to the point by just saying, this is bullshit, this doesn't work, that stands out. And maybe the person behind it has a bit of charisma, so there's an investment on that side. We're very much like, who is this person? And we're enamored by them to a degree. We have to be aware of that. I think that's something that we have to be conscious of when we see people online and they're espousing a certain doctrine. That's a very, very important thing to be aware of. But I guess in this context, what ends up happening is people point to a certain system and they end up saying, like, this is bullshit, this doesn't work. Like, you see it all the time in terms of the space where he might say, like, you know, bodybuilding is terrible, or yoga is terrible, it's, you know, it only works on flexibility. And while you might point to them and say, like, maybe they're lacking in certain areas, I think that's the one thing to point out, is it's only when you go and do that, and only go and do that forever, that's where the issues start to present themselves. You know, a system may be suited for you. You know, something like yoga, if you've no level of flexibility, or if you've never really learned to relax, if you've never really learned to breathe, if you've never seen that aspect of things within your physical education over the years, then maybe it would be valuable to go and spend some time working on those things. But we get caught up in this idea of, that's the thing that I do, and it's the only thing that I will ever do. You know, it's very much like a short term, this is the fix, and people get people dive into it and think that this is the magic sauce, this is the best thing in the world, perfect for me right now, this is what everyone else needs to go and do. And yes, to a degree, maybe people need it, but I guess it's the context at which it was so applicable for you. The results that you got were very immediate, and cool. But then it's like, what's the next stage? What's the next phase? And I think we have to consider that within our physical development. You know, it has to expand, it has to broaden, it has to incorporate new things over time, and it can't be just too fixed and static. You know, it is a process. It is a process that changes and molds over time, and shouldn't be so fixed. So we need to give things the adequate time to have their effect. Of course, we can't just expect change to happen in such a short term. But I guess we also have to be aware that we need to shift away from these short term expectations, these short term goals, or the short term lens that we have on things. And it kind of leads me into maybe some of the things that I wanted to touch on today. What I want to point to are about 5 or 6 different things, things that I think are really relevant to be aware of in your own practice when you're maybe stuck, or you're plateaued, or you're looking at things through a very narrow lens. And it's one of the qualities that I look at in students as maybe one of the mindset shifts that people have to make, because a lot of the time that's what teaching and guiding is just pointing to a mindset or a perspective that is not serving them, you know, that they need to rid themselves of in order to see their next phase of development. They're seeing things in a very specific way, and as a result, that's kind of blocking them. You know, you're only ever going to be able to live up to a perspective. You know, that perspective might close you off and box you in as a result. And as a result of that, because it might be a very rigidly held belief, that is going to limit you. You know, you're never going to. It's going to be very hard for you to act outside of that perspective, because it's such a focused lens that you have on the world. So there's an element of pointing to this level of open-mindedness that's really important, and it's not you know, I think of that open-mindedness as recognizing the value in things that you're not aware of, you know, because you are likely unaware of some of the things that you're currently having issues with, and that's, I guess, what I want to point to with these kind of like 5 or 6 things. You're unaware of them at the moment, and hopefully through maybe pointing and going through these, you'll become aware of 1 or 2 of these things that you're limiting yourself with, and as a result, that kind of opens the door. It opens the door for change and for growth. That's really what we want to allow for, because our beliefs in a way are a strong. They're a strong attractor state, they're a strong pull, they're a strong reason why we, as I said, we might be plateaued, we might be stuck in a certain way with our practice. So one of the things I point to is understanding this idea of taking responsibility. So one way you can think of this is you're probably pointing to a lot of external things, external factors as to why you're maybe not making progress. You know, if you've got a bit of a training experience, maybe your schedule has changed, some things around you in terms of life have gotten in the way, and it's a big thing. A lot of people with work, I think I've pointed to this already across the behind the scenes stuff, where, you know, work shows up, or work gets in the way of your practice, and it kind of, in a way, it doesn't specifically limit you. It just makes you aware of your priorities. Of course, work is work. For a lot of people, it's a huge part of who they are, and it's a huge part of their day, and it can cause a lot of stress, and as a result, it can take a high space of priority. It does, of course. It's how we live a lot of the time. But what ends up happening is it puts pressure on the things outside of it. Time is limited to a degree, but we then have to weigh up, well, Am I going to execute on some of the training that I have when work has now put pressure on that area of my life? And it's easy to then point the finger and say, oh, the reason why I'm not progressing in my training is because of work. It's causing me to miss sessions. I'm not as active as I maybe could be. Or maybe it's other things. But I guess I point to those kind of more specific external factors like time, availability, all that sort of stuff. They're very easy to point to when really we have to make that shift in understanding it as more of a priority. You know, what you're doing then as a result of not doing your practice session, your training, is you're pushing it aside for something else. You know, you're prioritizing maybe being able to watch TV in the evening as something that's of higher value based on your actions. You know, your actions will point to the things that you prioritize. So if you're spending a lot of time on social media, if you are watching Netflix, if you're spending it potentially out on weekends and stuff like that, it's up to you. You live your own life that kind of way. I'm not saying that those things themselves are wrong. It's just how much are you allowing those things to maybe take over your life, and in terms of maybe becoming more of a priority than they need to be. You've got to weigh that up. And that's the unaware and aware side of things, where maybe you are unaware at the moment as to how much of a priority you're seeing those things, maybe unconsciously. You know, you're going out on a very regular basis, and that's feeding over into other areas of your life, and it's disrupting your practice, it's disrupting your training, it's disrupting your nutrition, all of these things that would help you in some ways develop. So that's one thing, that idea of kind of placing blame on external factors. This is kind of a warning sign in a way, like it's kind of, this is more down to the experience of things. And this is how maybe we think of this as like the negative emotions that rise up to kind of maybe point to, you know, how heavily we respond to negative emotions can kind of point to this need for change, something to be shaken up. You know, negative emotions aren't necessarily bad in themselves. They just point to certain areas, certain things that we need to observe, we need to analyze maybe a little bit more. But the idea of maybe being a little bit jealous of others, you know, jealous of those that are maybe making more progress in an area that you want to develop, and that it might be training, it might be within the workspace. Jealousy is an interesting one. You know, it kind of points to a desire. You know, it points to it's as I said, it's a bit of a warning sign maybe that you have an area that you want to develop that you're not putting any time towards. So it's another one of those things to maybe be to become aware of, to use as a warning sign as to something is going undeveloped. I'm not working towards something that I know I should be. Another one, I guess, is maybe you're seeing accountability as somewhat unnecessary because you are currently, like, you're doing the thing you're currently doing. What I mean is, like, you know, if you're like, for example, I've needed accountability in the past, and I've always found that my growth and my development, when I've been held accountable to some form of process, has always been better. And you hear it all the time where people are like, oh no, I'll figure it out on my own, because maybe you have a bit of experience in the area. You're not necessarily an expert, but you're not a complete novice. So as a result, you've gained a little bit of experience, and you're like, yeah, cool, I can handle things a little bit myself. And you know, I've certainly gone through it with my training for periods of time where I'm like, yeah, I could handle kind of managing things myself for a while. And of course, I'm a PT, I'm a coach and a teacher, so I can handle that too, because based off my experience and my expertise, of course. But maybe you're going about that and you're seeing accountability as something that is necessary for novices and not necessarily someone with your level of expertise, your level of experience. And it leads to maybe bad habits developing. It leads to that feeling of being stuck in a rut, or just really not progressing with many things because you're almost unwilling to adopt a new process, to go through a process of change. You know, it's what I pointed to before, where it's like the issue really is we become stale. We only do certain things that we like, rather than understanding the development as being, we have to touch on the things that we maybe can't see at the moment that are valuable, but an expert kind of points to and says, you're lacking in this area and you potentially need to work on it. And through that process of kind of going through it practically, you start to become aware of, oh wow, I was so undeveloped in this area and it was really hindering me. But at the time, I was just completely unaware of it. I really had to be brought through that process. Someone had to point the way and get me to take action. Not necessarily to the point that, like, you know, they're pushing you massively. You know, like we think of an in-person personal trainer as being someone that's like standing over us and screaming. It's more down to that idea of like just guiding the way and just pointing to it and saying like, this needs a little bit more attention. I think you should really focus some time and effort here. Then you as the person have to kind of put faith in the process, put faith in the person that you're trusting to kind of guide the way. And the accountability then comes from saying, cool, I'm going to adopt this process and I'm going to see it through, even though right now I might not necessarily have full understanding of it or full investment in it. I'm going to invest in the process, stay accountable, and then you're then aware that the change happens from there. That's when those kind of breakthrough moments happen. The other one then is another warning sign. We're on to kind of the fourth one. So you're probably you're probably very fixed in your mindset at the moment. So you're not recognizing how you're saying certain things to yourself, and you're saying them through this lens of this can't be done. You know, I can kind of point to this in myself where I've pointed at certain things. Like right now in my practice, I'm working on the middle splits and the front splits, and I've always had this issue because of how I got like a very serious injury, very serious knee injury, and it made me very aware of how immobile my hips were. You know, even when I was doing kung fu and kickboxing when I was younger, I was like never able to do high kicks, and through that over time, I understood it then as an area that needed to develop, and because I did, I saw some progress. My meniscus injury, I was able to rehab it fully, you know, but it was something that is still kind of maintained over that is, oh, I'll never be that flexible, you know, pointing to others and pointing to other things, saying, I need to develop a little bit of mobility in an area and kind of develop from there, but I'll never be that flexible, pointing to others and saying like, geez, that's a crazy amount of flexibility. I'll never be that. I'll never be able to achieve that. And it's subtle, you know, it's not as obvious. It's once again, it's a thought pattern. It's a loop that we might be in that we have to bring to our consciousness and realize like, oh, I'm completely limiting myself because I'm saying I can't, I'll never be that. So as a result, I'm never really going to put the effort in, or I never did really put the effort into gaining those kind of more extreme levels of flexibility. And I had to weigh that up. As, is this something that I want? And I could see it was something that I want and something that I have been developing as of recent. And as a result, it's filtering out into other areas. You know, I have to believe that it is possible. I might weigh it up at a certain point and go, do you know what? Like, I mean, I don't necessarily need the flex that is the full middle splits. I've gotten as much as I can out of it, and I think it satisfies me to a certain degree. Like there is a point, there's the point of no return, or there's a point of no returns in the sense that I'm putting so much effort into one specific thing, but I'm fucking hating the rest of my practice. Like, I'll have to weigh that up when the time comes. Right now, I'm currently enjoying it, so it's no big deal. But I guess it's the limiting belief that I'm pointing to here as the thing that's maybe getting in your way. Like, is there something that you're just very fixed in your mind as to, like, you know, maybe you're saying I'm not smart enough to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe you're saying I'm not, I've never been consistent enough with X, Y, and Z. All these things that you kind of point to that you can say, like, you're saying very fixed terms, you're saying very fixed phrases and sentences about certain aspects of who you are and what you could potentially achieve. So that's certainly something to be aware of. It's one of those warning signs. Another thing is you're maybe too reactive to the things around you, and you see this once again with maybe those with a little bit of experience. You're adjusting on the fly. You know, you're not necessarily proactively going about change. You're not necessarily setting out a roadmap, a plan. You need a sense of direction. Like, things don't necessarily need to be concrete. They don't need to be like everything laid out bit by bit, like loads of time. We talked about this in the last video, where it's like the planning can get to us where we don't we fob things off because we're always in the planning stage. We obviously have to take action. But when you have no plan, no trajectory. And once again, it comes down to maybe you are doing some things, but you're just plateauing because you're taking action, but the action is really directionless. It's become almost a box ticking exercise. It hasn't necessarily become something of a process, something that builds on itself. That's what we really want out of these the things that we do. We want them to be a process of development, of change over time. We don't want to remain stagnant. We don't want to plateau. We don't want to remain fixed in who we are. We want to see that growth and change in terms of our potential. So I guess this to point to something that you can use as a bit of assistance in an area like this is the meaningful goal setting system I set up. I talked about this in the last episode. I've talked about it in a few of them. Once again, it's a free resource. I didn't point to it exactly, but I'll link it in the description here. If you click through on that link, you'll be brought to the Connected Movement School free community. So some course material in there, practical material that you can go through. There's some short lectures to be able to just give you a insight into how goal setting works from a psychological perspective, why it works, how we might go through the emotional stages and the emotional roller coaster as to why maybe your goals didn't work in the past, why we have such resistance to goal setting, but then reframing it, seeing it as a huge part of the process, which it is. That's why I did the training. It's something that I've pointed to in various times in terms of this episode and in terms of what we're talking about now. But it's a huge part of the process. So I'd really point you to that. Have a read through the material. And certainly go through the process itself. And it's really pointing to this idea of things as a system. Like that's what I'm really pointing to here is we get stuck, don't we, in terms of the here and now sometimes, where we have to see our actions and everything that we're doing as part of a system, a process of things that is unfolding over time. And when we can have that zoomed out perspective, that is where we are able to make the necessary adjustments, see it in terms of the overall picture, and comprehend and understand that maybe my actions aren't aligning with the outcome that I want. And then if they are, do I just need to see through this process, see through those emotional stages that I talk through, understand that we will have that kind of negative spiral of emotions every now and then, but we need to develop that mindset of resilience, persistence of action, to overcome, to see past it to the point that it's not necessarily such a huge mental battle. We overcome the obstacles that are put in front of us, and we reach our desired outcome. And we go through that process again. We redefine our goals, not necessarily out of dissatisfaction of ourselves or who we've become or how we operate, but more out of an understanding of this process of development that can take place. Maybe things aren't as serious after a certain period of time. We can flow back, but we understand the bigger picture of setting something out in front of us and seeing it as more of a process. So I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at that. Link in the description. The last one that I want to point to here then is you're probably too focused on some form of short-term result. And it kind of links back to everything that I've just said there in terms of systems and what I kind of pointed to earlier, is you're not giving some what you're working on enough time to develop. We become very, very short. We become very occupied with the short-term result. We want to see the change now, and we really have to have that perspective shift. We have to go through that process of understanding that. We will go through tough periods. We have to endure. We have to really remain resilient in our actions, and that's just setting expectations, understanding that the consistency of action over time is what will get us to where we want to go. And I think I'll leave it there in terms of the warning signs. Those 5 or 6 that we've just gone through there, because I want to make sure that these episodes aren't too huge. They're digestible and easy to manage. But yeah, I'm really hoping that you've been able to see and understand where I'm coming from with those warning signs as to why you might need to look at some form of change, whatever that is. If it's working with someone, like I point to it because it's given me such value, is understanding my problems, the areas that I'm having issues with, and seeking help, like working with someone through this, someone who has the experience. I've been moving and active for years, and I've gone through that process of obstacles, coming up against issues, and you only gain that perspective by going through the process itself. You can learn all the theory that you want, but you have to take action. You have to overcome it, of course. But when you work with someone, it's that idea of pointing to certain things. Like I said, being able to point to something and say, this area needs attention. Investing in the process, understanding that, there might be some resistance to it, but what shift do we have to make mentally to be able to because the action itself, like we can do all the things that we want in terms of effort, but if we're not working on the right areas, we're not working on the right things, we're not overcoming the mental barriers that are in the way of us taking action in the right place, we can just be spinning our wheels for ages. So yeah, if you want to get an idea of the meaningful goal setting system, have a go to link in the description. Leave comments, like all that sort of stuff. Reach out to me on Instagram. I'll link it below as well. If you want to have a conversation, if you want to chat about things, if you need any help with anything movement related or anything like that, be sure to reach out. But for the moment, folks, that was another episode of the Meditations on Movement podcast. I'll see you soon.